Hi, my name is Hudson. To understand how Roe v. Wade came to be in the first place, we first have to understand the 14th Amendment and more specifically, due process and right to privacy, which are rooted in the 14th Amendment. Let's start with due process. When the Constitution was first written, there was a huge emphasis to protect citizens from an overreaching federal government. After all, that's what the Revolutionary War was all about. England was flexing its muscles and the colonists had no free will. Now you would think that after the Revolutionary War, this whole big fight for free will, the newly formed America would end slavery right then and there, right? Wrong. You see, with war comes debt, and a lot of it. Were there people that truly believed black people should be in chains? Yes. But I truly believe there were more who believed, especially in the spirit of victory, that black people in this country should have been given their freedom. But when you weighed our freedom versus the almighty dollar, the dollar won. Establishing a country while in the midst of massive war debt meant that we were to remain slaves to help pay off white colonist freedom. To justify it, they convinced themselves, as well as poor whites that were also suffering, that we were savages unworthy of freedom. Not a new narrative, of course, just one that was already created by the previous colonizing regime, but one that gained a tremendous amount of steam in the years leading up to the Civil War. Growing discontent between individual states and the federal government were coming to a head with the question of slavery being at the very center of it all. Many other countries outlawed the practice, and many people were getting fed up saying enough is enough, end slavery already. And it marked the time where slavery and an overall hatred for black people in this country became rooted in conservative and state right idealists. Now, this is where due process comes in. Right after the Confederacy surrendered, things began to move way too fast for white people in the South and various other places in the country. You had black people going around, sitting wherever they wanted, drinking from whatever fountains they wanted, voting and whatnot. This was way too much. So individual states began taking it upon themselves to introduce laws prohibiting black people from doing the things that citizens should be able to do. Thus, the 14th Amendment, with the all-important due process clause, came into effect. Due process covers a whole lot of ground, but for the purposes of this video, I will simplify it to this. Due process prevents states from making laws that are in direct contradiction to the federal Constitution. Also, it prevents states from making excessive laws geared toward restricting an individual's constitutionally protected rights. So in other words, the Supreme Court has upheld that a person's right to film the police, let's say, falls directly under the First Amendment. Therefore, no state in this union can make a law that forbids you and I from filming the police because of the due process clause in the 14th Amendment. However, laws can and have been made governing some of the circumstances surrounding filming the police. For instance, in the interest of officer and public safety, a state can make a law saying you have to remain at least 10 feet away from an officer when they are performing a traffic stop. But let's say a state made a law that said you had to be 10,000 feet away from an officer. It would be likely that the Supreme Court would rule that the state was violating an individual's First Amendment by way of the due process clause in the 14th Amendment. So, due process, when it comes to Roe v. Wade, refers to protecting individuals from federal or state laws that contradict or hinder the rights outlined in the federal Constitution. Now let's move on to right to privacy. Most people take the right to privacy a little too literally. It doesn't mean that the government can't be all in my business. Right to privacy refers to an individual's right to make personal decisions without government intrusion. This one is not as complicated as due process. This one is very simple. It means that the police can't take me to jail for buying a Ford automobile instead of a Chevy. It means that I could in fact own both a Ford and Chevy if I had the economic means to do so. It means the government can't tell me what job I can choose to take or what salary I have to accept. I can choose public or private school for my children. I can marry a white woman, black woman, or another man if I so choose to. And none of those things are private. The government keeps records on all of that. But I have a right to make those personal decisions without the federal or state government stepping in and making the decisions for me. That, my friends, is right to privacy. Now, I'm about to drop a bombshell on you. Right to privacy doesn't actually exist. Right to privacy is not specifically outlined in our federal constitution. It is alluded to in various sections, but it's not a thing. But since it is alluded to, a Supreme Court can decide whether it is a thing or not. So in 1973, the Supreme Court decided that right to privacy is a thing, and they used it as part of the foundation for Roe v. Wade, saying that right to privacy gives women the right to get an abortion without government intrusion. Because of that decision, to recognize the right to privacy, our right to make personal decisions without government intrusion was established and held firm for almost 50 years. That is until 2022, when the Supreme Court said that the right to privacy is not an inherent right in the Constitution, and that since abortions are not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, then that also is not a protected right. What the Supreme Court has said is that anything not specifically mentioned in the Constitution is up for federal or state regulation. It means that the government can potentially insert themselves into any decision, major or minor, you make that is not specifically protected in the Constitution. Can you think of any decisions that you make on a daily basis that you wouldn't want your government involved in? How about what doctor you want to see? What about what type of firearms you own? Or how many firearms you can own? How about whether you get a vaccine or not? Are you all starting to connect the dots on this? So, I gotta say that I'm especially confused at all the conservatives that believe overturning Roe v. Wade was a good move, because I thought you all were against government overreach. But this decision gives the federal and state governments the opportunity to do just that, overreach. Now make sure to watch the next videos that will start to dive into some of the other rulings that are in danger of being overturned. My name is Hudson, and this is Roe v. Wade, Overturned.